the same thing is the same case, where these companies now, you're not going to be betting on some new startup. The whole ICO thing wouldn't make as much sense once this specific company is far outperforming everything else. So it's just a matter of time. It may take a few more years, but it's going to happen.
Fun fact, sorry I had to say this. So if you look at a lot of the countries that are going through a lot of issues, like Zimbabwe, financial and monetary issues, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, obviously the Venezuelan bolivar has lost almost all of its value through hyperinflation. And even after the recent Bitcoin crash, if you held Bitcoin, you would have, I don't remember what the percentage was, but you have much more money than you would have had if you had Venezuelan bolivars. And the point is, for a lot of these countries, and the financial crisis really killed all of us. Like it's put us through so much in terms of the Caribbean, a lot of these other countries. It's put us in a multitude of debt that we can't get out of, and we probably will never be able to get out of. And the whole financial system really needs to be uprooted. Not to go too much into it, but I believe in a debt jubilee where countries like ours, Caribbean countries who have had nothing to do with the financial crisis, get absolved, at least partly, of a lot of this debt. But I'm going on a tangent. But
but you're right. You're correct.
Right. But I mean, that again, going back to the point of these currencies, the point of Bitcoin, the point of what's going on with the blockchain. I'm just going to...
All right. Yeah, I think you have one more question there. Yeah?
Yes, good afternoon. I have more of a comment than a question. My comment is I am very happy and very proud of what I'm seeing happening here. I think this is a start of something very much larger for the Bahamas and the Caribbean diaspora as a whole. But what I would say is that we have to expand this conversation to not just Bitcoin and blockchain and cryptocurrencies, but there are a lot of ingenious behemoths that do tech startups that are here. And I'm telling you, you may not know of them, but if we have a similar, I know we had the Tech Hub recently as well, but if you have a larger conversation, there's a lot of behemoths, because one thing about behemoths, we could find a way to do something if we really want to do it. We could find a way, and that's how our brains are wired. So we have found ways to do things that people say it shouldn't be done. So I'm saying we have to open this conversation to blockchain and cryptocurrencies is very important in the way forward, creating capital and all that kind of stuff, but we have to open it up to more other tech firms and other type of companies as well.
One last question.
Okay. There it is. Okay.
Yes, hi team. Again, amazing guys. I appreciate you guys. Looking forward to working with you. I think with the Bahamas having so many different types of industries in it, besides the tourism and the finance, I want you guys to give just a few examples of some of the other great industries where blockchain can apply and help and benefit the Bahamas.
Well, you could talk a little bit about your, I mean, because it's such an interesting use case. But
Christy really wants to say something.
So I was going to say, so there's, this administration is very focused on the ease of doing business and improving the lives of citizens. So one thing I think most of you in here can agree to is like the process that you have to go through to get a business license, and then you have to have a business license and you have to put it up in your location, right? And then somebody comes by every so often and they scan it with a QR code. Perfect example for blockchain. What if, imagine a world where you issue that business license on the blockchain and a government official comes in, you can then go ahead and just send them an email and say, hey, this is my verification, and they could go ahead and verify that your credential actually exists that your business license is still valid. So that would fall under the Department of Inland Revenue that ultimately bubbles up into the Ministry of Financial Services. Similarly with education at the University of the Bahamas, imagine a student who graduates, we can then go ahead and put that certificate as well on the blockchain. There's health records, there is land registry that we had a whole debate about earlier. There are a myriad of different projects that the government can go ahead and look into to explore using blockchain. Matthew hit on it yesterday as well, which is, I mean, essentially you would not use a butter knife to dig into a tomahawk, right? And there's the right tool for the right job for everything. I definitely don't think that the blockchain is going to solve all of our technological problems within the Bahamas, but it's certainly a step in the right direction.
So I have something to add to that. I think the blockchain is more of an infrastructure type of system, and it allows for other things to be built upon it. So with that being said, the type of industries I would like to see this technology be used for are billion-dollar industries, right? Billion-dollar industries that could totally revolutionize the Bahamas. So for this type of stuff, there's an acronym, GRAIN. You have genetics, robotics, artificial intelligence, emerging industries, and nanotechnology. Each one of those are a game changer and will change the face of this planet, okay? They could be used in multiple facets, but creating the blockchain infrastructure is paramount to create a system of transparent trust to allow these technologies to be built upon. They are game changing, but they can also be abusively used. So having a transparent system, make sure that they're used for everyone's well-being and not used for any form of harm or terrorist activity.
Good point.
I think we have another question. I think the gentleman had a question.
I'm sorry, we have reached our limit of questions.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
But if you could remain on stage just for a moment for a quick photo op of all of you with,
Is that it? We're done.
okay.
Okay.
I wanna-
Thanks very much, everybody. Round of applause
Thank
for the
you.
panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Did you enjoy it?
As we transition and get ready for our next panel and our speakers prepare for a photo op, I'm going to try and stick to this script as much as I can, but, I cannot think of another moment where I have been so proud to be a part of a force in change. We have heard so many answers from our own people. I hear collaboration.
I don't know you.
I hear excitement, and I see a willingness for ourselves to better ourselves by the persons represented on this panel. And for that, I think we all deserve a round of applause just for being here and participating.
This is it, yeah. Come on, guys.
Rhonda?
Rhonda? Yeah, come on. Sorry, I got still had the voice of God.
Tap Kim.
Kim? Kimberly? Yeah. Thank you. All right.
It's great meeting you.
Pleasure.
Thanks so much. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Good stuff. You will definitely talk later.
And so let me forewarn my fellow Bahamians who are now leaving the stage.
Thank you so much.
One of the mandates of Minister Thompson is where I come in. Just recently, the Office of the Prime Minister, Grand Bahama, has implemented a new division or a new arm of the ministry. And I'm a part of that, and I'm very, very excited. There are a team of us, 4 of us actually, who represent various areas of industry. And more than anything else, I can say that we are truly honored and excited to be a part of change. And so, P.S., I am very grateful for this opportunity, and we are ready to work to make Grand Bahama in particular more than just sustainable, but beneficial to our own people. So thank you very much.
That was great.
And so as we transition and get ready for our next panel, I see that they're still being mic'd. I just want to say thanks to all of you, and I know a part of our culture, especially just listening and chatting with some of you, this whole idea of blockchain and cryptocurrency can be a bit intimidating if you're not fully aware. And one of the things that my dad always said to us growing up as children is that the strength of any nation is in the education of its people. And I certainly feel that we are taking a right step in a right direction to become owners of our own destiny. And so I applaud each and every one of you.
Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, could we please have some quiet so that we can, thank you.
And so at this time, I officially want to say thank you to Mr. Casey and his team, or our team of expert panelists, for enlightening us further and spreading about the message of blockchain, which is very enthusiastic for all of us. We are definitely excited, not only for the future of the Bahamas, but as a Grand Bahamian, the future of Grand Bahama. As we prepare for our final panel, and if I can get some indication by a wave of a hand, if we are ready, I can go ahead and begin the introduction. No, not yet? Okay. While we wait, are there any comments about what you've experienced? And I place this to the audience. Anybody's brave enough to give a comment about what they've learned or any experiences that they've had in the conference to date? Any brave soul out there? We have a few hands. We have a few hands. Some comments about what you've experienced, what you've learned so far?
For me, it's been incredible, but I must say some of the presentations would have been very helpful, have been presented first. And I think I'm now getting a hang of things, but it's been absolutely incredible. Thank you very much.
Set?
Thank you.
There you go.
There's another one.
Yes.
Another one.
My primary comment, yes, a more basic definition of genius is the ability to take a complex idea and simplify it so that it can be conferred to others. And the work that gentlemen like Casey, the previous panel, and especially Crypto Chicks has done to simplify for an audience who may not have the technological background.
Yes.
I commend all of them for an excellent job. Well done.
Hazel?
I'm really excited to be here. My experience has been since the 80s in technology. And I don't want you to be fooled, but there are some Bahamians out there that are so very sharp. And I wish I'd see us more of this and us throwing out the bait to them to say, come on back and do some more things. Thanks.
And I think we're ready? Okay, very good. All right, and so having said that, time certainly flies when we're having fun. And indeed, I think we've all enjoyed all aspects of our learning process during this conference. It's now time for us to conclude our day with our final panel. And so we are privileged to have another industry leader with us at the BBCC conference, Mr. Joel Tepner, partner, Sullivan and Worcester. And right now, he, together with his expert panel, will share with us some of the legalities and regulations involved with blockchain. Please pay special attention to the following panel: a global perspective on regulatory frameworks for cryptocurrencies and ICOs and their view of Caribbean jurisdictions with respect to the SEC and EU. That's a mouthful. Please welcome to the stage Mr. Joel Tepner and the panel.
Thank you.
We go after you, madam.
Thanks. Thank you.
I love that.
Monica, Marie, Noel, and Kenneth, come on up. So we did a poll, and we asked everybody here today, out of all the panels, if there was one that you could pick to have at the very end of the day, especially if you knew that the only thing stopping you from going to the bar was this panel, which one would you want? And everybody said overwhelmingly, regulation. It was amazing. It was just amazing. So as the last panel, I understand we're going to be going till about 7 or 7:30 tonight. So please save your questions for the end. So I want to give just a brief overview or set the stage about the regulatory issues involving blockchain, in particular crypto and ICOs. And so I'm going to pose a lot of questions, but then I'm going to turn it over to my fellow panelists who are going to provide all of the answers. And so when you're the moderator, you get to ask the questions. You don't actually have to know the answers. So why is it that regulation is so complicated when we start to talk about the interaction between regulation and blockchain? What is it that makes it such a daunting topic? Well, I think there's certain things about blockchain, if we keep in mind, it'll help us put in perspective why regulators globally, as well as here in the Bahamas, struggle about what to do with blockchain and regulation. So one, blockchain is disruptive. Anytime you have disruptive innovation, it poses regulatory challenges. I mean, this is not anything that's unique to blockchain. If you go back and look at the evolution of the internet, or the evolution of television, or the evolution of telephone, all of those things were disruptive technologies that challenged regulators. When you have disruptive innovation, particularly like blockchain, it creates regulatory challenges because regulators, often like all of us, have a hard time understanding exactly what is happening, what blockchain is all about, what it means, what type of changes, what types of disruptions it's going to cause. And when you have all of those unanswered questions, it's very hard as a regulator to know whether you need to regulate, whether you don't need to regulate, whether you're regulating too much or not enough. So I'm very sympathetic to the challenges that regulators all over the world have as they start to understand and look at new blockchain technology. And we know that blockchain moves at lightning speed. Even 6 months ago, if we were up here talking about blockchain, we'd be talking about something very different than we are today. And 6 months from now, it's going to change again. And so when you have blockchain evolution and technology moving that quickly, it's typically moving faster than regulatory developments. Wow. Regulators have to learn and understand, and they have to try to catch up. It's always a race, and regulators are typically always running behind. And the other aspect of that is when you've got something moving so fast is that the evolution that blockchain causes, the uses that can come out of blockchain applications are unpredictable. So even if we try to regulate, the question becomes, how do we know what we should be regulating? How do we even know where to begin when we're talking about such an unpredictable world that if you try to say, what's it look like 6 months from now? Where are we going? What's going to happen? And if the experts in the industry can't answer that for sure, how can regulators try to answer that? So there's another aspect to it that maybe is somewhat unique to blockchain. I mean, we experienced this again with the internet, but in particular this is true with blockchain, which is that blockchain is jurisdictional agnostic. Blockchain technology doesn't care where you are in the world. You can be here, you can be in Antarctica, you can be on the moon and still engage in blockchain-related applications and technology. And so if blockchain doesn't respect jurisdictional boundaries, how do regulators regulate that type of environment? How are they supposed to work amongst themselves and on a global basis? So what does that all mean? Well, I think there's a group out there that because of all of this thinks that blockchain is beyond regulatory reach. That, you know, there's been an element of early adopters in blockchain that I would call either crypto anarchists or libertarians or maybe just believers in a new utopia, but felt that blockchain was beyond regulation. And that with the nature of this type of cyber world we're living in, there's no way to regulate blockchain, so this whole debate and discussion around regulation is irrelevant. Well, I think they're foolhardy. I think that we found out in other types of industries, in other types of scenarios where we started out locally and things started to become global, that didn't mean that all of a sudden we could no longer regulate. It again imposes challenges. It requires us to think differently about how we regulate, but it doesn't mean we can't regulate. Then there's the flip side. I think there's also part of this maybe idealistic concept that since we're talking about distributed ledger technology that democratizes everything, that sure there's a need potentially to regulate some of the blockchain applications and activities out there, but it can all be done on a self-regulatory basis. Let the blockchain communities regulate themselves. Well, there's certainly going to be all kinds of activities and applications in the blockchain world where self-regulation makes sense to an extent. We have all kinds of examples in today's world where organizations of people come together and engage in various levels of self-regulation. So that's fine, but that's also not the answer. That's only part of it. So where does that leave us? Here are the questions that I think we're going to try as a panel to talk about today. Are the traditional concepts of laws and regulations outmoded, outdated, no longer applicable to blockchain? How do we answer that? Well, let's think of it from a regulatory perspective. First of all, I think it's important for all of us and for regulators to start to ask fundamental questions. Let's just not throw out large concepts about blockchain being distributed, being decentralized, being democracy in action. Let's drill down. And when we're talking about blockchain, let's really talk about what we mean. And so we want to give an example today, and I think we're going to talk about cryptocurrency and tokens and ICOs. And we're going to talk about that as a way to try to figure out how we approach regulation. Because in order to start thinking about regulating crypto and tokens and ICOs, we have to ask, what is it that we're regulating? I mean, what actually is it that is happening in the world for which we may or may not need regulation? And if we start to think about asking those types of questions, then maybe at least gives us a framework for moving forward. So let me set the stage, and then we're going to open it up. What is this? Money. Right. Is there any question as to how this is regulated? We know how to regulate this, right? Every country around the world has regulations with respect to the use of money and currency. We regulate banks. We regulate foreign exchange. We may disagree on some of the regulations, but we certainly know how to regulate. What about this? What's this? It's a stock certificate.
Stock certificate.
We all more or less know, no matter what country we're in the world, how people regulate the issuance, sale, and trading of securities. There are fundamental concepts that most countries have about protecting investors and making sure that when companies are selling shares of stock that there's no fraud involved. So there's a general understanding of how we regulate securities. What about this? Gold. It's a type of precious metal, a type of commodity. So again, we have well-known existing regulatory regimes as to how the world regulates commodities. We try to protect markets and create stability. We may do it a little bit differently in different countries, but we have a general consensus. Now, what about this? What is this? What's a cryptocurrency? What is it? Here's what I think it is. This is what I think this is. It's a chameleon. It's a chameleon. Cryptocurrency can be different depending on who is creating it, why they're creating it, what they're going to use it for, who's going to use it. All of those things become huge fundamental questions of what this is and how it should be regulated. This is unique from the standpoint that we don't have a lot of precedents in the world for something, whatever that something is, that can be so different depending on who's using it and why they're using it and how they're using it and how it's been distributed. That creates all kinds of interesting, unique, and complex regulatory issues. So the goal, I think, especially if you're looking at it from the market, private sector standpoint, is to make sure that whatever regulation we have strikes an appropriate balance. Not too much, not too little. And when I say not too little, I know, again, as I said, there are people out there that think that the market should just do what it wants to do. I will tell you up front, I don't believe that. I think there is room for appropriate regulation, just like there are for other types of market activities, but the emphasis is on appropriate regulation. And so the challenge becomes in trying to look at things like crypto, tokens, ICOs. Well, what type of rules should we have? What type of regulation should we have? What type of compliance approaches should we have? Those are tough questions. It's going to take a long time for regulators around the world to reach consensus on that. And it is our duty, our responsibility as people on the private sector side, and I know there are people here from the government as well, but for people on the private sector side to educate their colleagues on the government side, to make sure there is continuous dialogue, to make sure that people understand the applications, opportunities, and potential of blockchain, so that regulators can see where it's going, to help regulators understand how they can actually use blockchain in appropriate regulation, to understand as well some of the downsides of blockchain, not to create a utopian world where everything's perfect, but to paint for regulators a realistic picture. So we have a role collectively to educate and work together with governments and regulators around the world to create a regulatory regime that is suitable for blockchain, for crypto, for ICOs. And if we don't, the consequences can be pretty bad. So that's the stage I set up. There are a lot of challenges, a lot of problems, but as well as opportunities. So what I want to do, guys, is ask you, like, what's bugging you right now? What's on your mind? If you had to pick one problem in this space, from a regulatory standpoint, what is it that you want to bring up and talk about?
You want to start with me, Joe?
Sure.
The former central banker from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, who was part of the Term Asset-Backed Liquidity Facility Program, which is part of TARP. So when we had the collapse around that period of time in 2006, 2007, one of the biggest issues that we had, Joe, was the issue of whether or not you can actually look at enterprise risk. How do you look at the risk from an enterprise perspective? The role of central bank is for safety and soundness and also consumer protection, right? So when you look at blockchain, you hear a lot about consumer protection, right? How do you protect the consumer? Safety and soundness takes a risk component. So what I have not heard is the idea of how do you actually look at it from a risk perspective. So how do you take it from the standpoint of the blockchain technology? Does it cause inherent risk at an institution? Also, do you deal with capital adequacy? Do you deal with liquidity? Do you deal with operations? Do you deal across the risk spectrum? Those are the things that are actually touching my mind right now. I don't hear that a lot in the industry. I don't see it a lot in terms of policy making. My experience as a policymaker, both also at the Fed, but also on the Basel II committee, is that you have to use multiple different avenues, examples. So when we sat on a committee, that goal of sitting on a committee to set policy is to have examples. So you have examples from multiple different companies or countries, and you sit down and you create policy. So there's a process that is being created. It's not that you just sit there and create any policy. There is a process in place to establish rules and regulations to identify, to measure, and to monitor and report. Once you do that, you mitigate the risk.
So I think part of that maybe, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, and I know we're going to talk about, we've been already hearing yesterday and today this so-called distinction or debate between a utility and security token. But I think there's perhaps part of what's underlying what you're saying is that in certain respects that's not relevant. We need to think maybe about the way blockchain applications are being used in a more holistic way and who can get hurt, and are there appropriate ways to potentially regulate to protect people regardless of the labels perhaps we put on some of these things like cryptocurrencies?
Well, not just people, but also, Joe, also the actual, when you look at blockchain, you look at the community, right? Look at the stakeholders. Let's go back to the fundamentals. Who are the stakeholders in that blockchain community? So you got to look at individuals, you got to look at corporations, you got to look at government. These are all stakeholders. So they're all part of the blockchain community themselves. If I'm a bank, let's give you an example. If I'm a bank and I decide that I want to invest in tokens, right? The idea with banks investing in tokens, they have to look at that from the standpoint, if that's a security, how much collateral they're going to use to support that security. Now you're looking at capital adequacy, right? So as a bank, I got to find a way to mitigate my risk against a security that's going to go up and down, right? Right? There's a chance that this security is going to move. It's going to have an impact on my balance sheet. So now you got the avenue of market risk, right? Market risk is mismatch, option, basis, and yield curve risk. So from a market risk standpoint, now you got to deal with market risk and how that's going to impact the changes in other products. And then you have to look at liquidity, right? Does this impact the sources of liquidity that I have to deal with as a bank? And then on the back end is operations, which is another area that we can talk about: fraud, technology risk, all that different spectrums that you have to deal with as a stakeholder on the blockchain community.
Okay, that's a lot. Monica, what's bugging you?
Well, so I'm a lawyer and I work with a number of technology entrepreneurs, but I'm also an entrepreneur myself. And so one of the things that, that is kind of top of mind is are you going to strike the right balance? Is there, and we've heard this commented several times in the last 2 days, what is the right balance in terms of regulation so that you don't stifle technology and technology innovation? So that is top of mind. Is like, are we going to strike the right balance? And how do we regulate this in a way that we don't stifle the local, technology entrepreneurs, so that they don't go somewhere else? You want to foster it. You want to have them here, stay here.
And I think that in all the interactions I have with regulators, that to give them credit, they share those same concerns. While people may think that they're out there to simply shut things down, that's really not their desire. I think most regulators do want to create innovative opportunities for their countries. They just want to do it in, I think, what they think is a rational, sensible way. Marina, well, what about you? What's bugging you? Or are you all cool this afternoon?
Thank you, everyone. And first and foremost, I'd like to thank the hospitality of the people of the Bahamas. I have been very impressed by the welcome here in the country. So, what keeps me up at night? I'm an anti-money laundering specialist and financing of terrorism. And I've heard for the past 2 days everybody talking about know your customer, KYC. This is the priority of most of the startups here, which is basically verifying who's coming to your company as an investor, as a facilitator. So, but I have not heard of the whole full life cycle of anti-money laundering. It's just not about knowing your customer. When you create this company or your startup, you have to think about the entire program. It's called the AML program, which is know your customer at the beginning, prevention. You want to prevent bad people from coming to your company. The second thing is, once you have registered these people, how do you monitor them? All the transactions that take place within your platform. So you have to continue, and this is what banks do. I work for a global bank that I cannot disclose here tonight because I'm here on my own capacity, but you want to monitor the transactions that are taking place, because here we're hearing a lot about cryptocurrency. Everybody's very interested in Bitcoin, and these are currencies, as you just showed on your slide. Money. It's all about money. It may be electronic money, but we have to know where the money is coming from and where it's going and how it's been used, because this money could be used by terrorists and you would not know. And that's the problem right now, where I haven't seen any major project in the field right now, and I haven't seen what regulators are doing about it. So once you monitor, the third step is to trigger an investigation. Once you flag a customer or an investor, this is a bad guy. He's probably on a list of terrorists. What do you do with it? So you have to trigger an investigation. So who's in your company is doing this? After you did know your customer, you verified. But now what do you do with this information? Once you flag a customer, you have to investigate and take it to law enforcement. So when I look at it, there have been many talks. There's a group called FAFT, which is the Financial Action Task Force, and this is a global compliance governance body. I think 37 countries are members of this governing body right now. I think the Bahamas may be part of the Caribbean one. And this body issues recommendations, and they have been trying hard to work on cryptocurrency since 2015. And the last that I know is they issued about 48 pages of recommendations, but now it's very broad. As you stated, nobody really knows. This is an uncharted territory. So what they did is they tried to leverage what we currently have in the traditional market today, and try to apply it to cryptocurrency, but it's not working. You can't just take apple and try to make it an orange. So it's not properly working because it's really left to each jurisdiction to work on its own. And so that's one point. And from the latest that I read is that they're trying to come up with recommendation by end of this month of June. So we are all very eager to see what they come up with, trying to define cryptocurrency, what to do with it. And however, the European Union has moved faster as of trying to approve the new recommendations on at least to ban the anonymity, because right now we know everything is anonymous. You know when you open an account, but you don't know the beneficiary when you send the money. It's as a crypto chick, Elena showed us, it's just a bunch of hash key, a private key. You'll see a private key, but you don't know who the private key belongs to. You don't know who even the public address belongs to. So what they came up with, the European Union is trying to ban this to make sure that, the exchanges give the regulators or the law enforcement these public addresses tied to a name of a person, so that if this is a terrorist, we can identify who the person is through this public address. So I'll turn it back to you.
So end of June, that means that we're going to have part 2 of the panel, I think, in July. So come back when we can find out what the new proposals say. But no, I think what underlies a lot of what you said are some challenges, which I would call misconceptions about, in the crypto space. And so let's start with KYC and AML. Even as recent as 6 months ago, I think a lot of people doing ICOs felt that they didn't have to do anything at all with respect to KYC and AML. And the only reason that really started to change was not because governments were cracking down, but they found out that they couldn't get bank accounts. They couldn't convert their crypto into fiat unless they could at least demonstrate to banks that the money wasn't tainted. So players in the ICO space started to reluctantly adopt some KYC standards, but it was, early stages. It was maybe show me a driver's license and that would be it. So not particularly robust standards, but at least they started to move towards it. I think over time we've seen a little bit more adoption, but again, I think there's a consumption that if people do in the ICO space do anything on the KYC AML side, it's with respect to the initial issuance of the coins only, and whatever happens once they're out there and are trading is irrelevant. I think that's a myth. Secondly, I think that in the ICO crypto space, there is a presumption that if you can just find the right jurisdiction, everything is okay. So there's a lot of forum shopping going around. Constantly people are coming in and saying, I want to do an ICO, what country should I set up my company in?
Yeah.
That's the first question they say. Well, actually the first thing they say is, my coin's a utility. I'm still waiting for the day that a client walks in and says, yeah, I know it's a security. But so first of all, everybody walks in and says, my coin is a utility. Then they say, what country should I set it up in? And with the presumption that as long as you pick the right country, everything is okay. And so people start saying, well, should I go to Gibraltar? Should I go to Switzerland? Should I go to Liechtenstein? Should I come here? And that's really the wrong question, because when you're looking at regulation of this market, it really has very little to do with where you're selling from. It has everything to do with where you're selling to. Where are your investors located? Because for the most part, it is the regulations of the country in which investors are located that determines what you have to do to comply with regulations, not where you're selling from. Then thirdly, there is this concept that, again, I can somehow talk about how my token is going to be used and what a great way it's going to be incorporated into my business or platform, so it must be a utility. And in most countries, there's no actual legal concept of utility. It's a made-up concept by the market. But that said, regulators everywhere, including, as we heard here yesterday, are trying to come up with potentially a way to distinguish between what's a security and what's a utility. But it's a problem. It's challenging. And think about it this way. I want to create this great blockchain business. I'm going to have this token. This token is going to allow people to access my platform. I'm going to be able to, if they buy a token, they can have membership in my platform. They can buy goods and services on my platform. They can refer other people, get rewarded my token. So there's going to be all these cool things that people can do if they buy my token, and therefore it's a utility, right? Well, here's the way a lot of regulators look at that. They'll say, okay, so that's utility. Let me ask you a couple questions. One, is your business up and running now? Well, no. And so you're selling the token now? Yeah, I need to raise money to build my platform. And so when are all these cool uses going to be available for your token? Well, probably 9 to 12 months. So that means right now, if somebody buys your token, all they can do is either hold it for 9 months and wait, or they can hopefully find somebody else that's willing to buy it from them at more than they paid for it. A lot of regulators around the world say that kind of sounds like a security. And then they'll say, well, let me ask you another question. How are you marketing your token? Are you going after those future customers on your platform? Are you explaining to them how they're going to use your token in your business? Or are you using social media sites, or like Facebook and Google until they shut it down, or Telegram, or other places to access the crypto speculators? The people that are the early adapters that buy tokens. Are those the ones you're going after as opposed to your future customers? That kind of sounds like a security.
Sounds like market conduct rules.
Or another question.
Sounds like a market conduct rules.
Right. So you need a token to access your platform. How many tokens do you need to access the platform to give you membership? 1. Then why are you telling people to buy 10,000? That sounds a lot more like an investment, not something that's a true utility. Right. And so a regulator again says, that kind of sounds like a security. Right. And then lastly, in typical ICO, it's very normal to attract early stage investors by offering them fairly big discounts. So before the ICO stage, you might go out and sell a good portion of your tokens, 30, 40, 50% discount, and a lot of those players that buy those tokens have the ability to sell them at or shortly after the ICO and make a quick buck by flipping the token. That sounds like somebody that's investing, not somebody that wants to use the token on the platform. And then lastly, it's pretty typical in a lot of ICOs for the founders to say, we're going to keep half the tokens for ourselves. And when you ask them why, and they say, well, we're actually not going to charge any revenue to use our blockchain platform. It's free, which is kind of a strange business model. But then you start to drill down, and of course, in the typical ICO, the number of tokens that are often sold is limited in quantity. So the expectation is we're going to build this cool business. We're going to limit the supply of tokens. Everybody's going to want to come to our platform. That's going to drive up the supply, the price of the token, because the demand is going to exceed the supply. And as the price of our token goes up, then the founders are going to take the 40% of the tokens they held back. They're going to sell them, make a lot of money, retire, and buy houses here. And that blockchain application, because it's decentralized, is going to run itself by the community. Well, I'm old, but I think that's kind of naive. And I think when you put all of those factors together, those all start to look like securities.
Yep.
So where does that leave us? Does that mean that all tokens really should be treated as securities? Or is there room for other regulatory regimes? Or is there room for tokens to be treated as utilities?
Well, in Canada, basically they followed the U.S. So recently,
well, that's a mistake.
Yeah. But there's a Howey test in the U.S.
Howey test,
and in Canada they said they have very similar. They basically adopted that into our case law, and so they take that approach. So it's a four-part test, and they say, is there a expectation of profit? So like what you just described, that's one of the ways that people entice people to buy these tokens or coins, is to say it's going to go up in price. And look at Ethereum, look at Bitcoin, look how much it went up in price. So they're attracting people on that basis. That's one of the things they look at. So there's a number of different factors that they look at, but they're going to take a more holistic approach. So they're saying, here are the different things that we're going to look at. And actually, just recently, the Canada Securities Administrator put out a nice kind of just guidelines on utility tokens or ICOs. And it has a chart in it which basically goes through some of the questions that you talked about, Joel. And one of them, for example, is there going to be tokens at a future date? If that is, then that looks more like a security. So it went through some of the different factors, like you just did, and said, this is going to mean that it's going to be a security. If it has this feature, then it's going to look more like a utility token. So it's a little bit more information than we had before. And I think that's a good approach. So basically, I would say about a year ago, that was when we had the first kind of guidelines from the securities regulator in Canada, and that was kind of saying, watch out, there's this Howey test. If it looks like a security, then it's going to be regulated by us. And that seemed to still not cool the ICOs. And then this, I think, is another attempt to say, hey, if you need more information, here is more information so that you know that, yes, you can be regulated by us.
So by the way, does the fact that you can profit from buying tokens, or that you may even expect to profit from buying tokens, automatically make the token a security?
No. There's a number of different parts to the test, so it's not just about expectation of profit.
Marie Noel, I want to go back to something that you were talking about, because I think one of the other misconceptions are that to the extent the market begrudgingly agrees that, okay, maybe there are regulations that apply at the time of an ICO, they are equally still adamant that once they've sold the tokens, it's out of their hands. That we're talking about technology in which, crypto can trade peer-to-peer, it can trade on exchanges all over the world that aren't necessarily regulated, and so the ICO issuer says, look, hey, I've complied with regulations, but now I've sold it. It's out of my control. Whatever happens now, there's nothing I can do. I mean, if you look at it, for example, from the standpoint of AML, KYC, is that true? Should they just say, I've issued my tokens, that's it, I'm done?
No. The answer right now is no. You're on the hook. You're not off the hook with that. We've seen, I can give an example of one of the major ICO. I registered for this ICO December. It was supposed to go live December 18th. And December 20th, ICO was closed. They had hit the hard cap because this guy was big on national media, news outlet in the US. He's been on the market in this industry. And everybody thought, my goodness, this is great. Guess what? He has been indicted. Yes. So people have lost. I don't know what's going to happen with that. So once you launch an ICO, that's not it. You run your KYC, you launch your ICO, you're not off the hook, because you still need to, from what we're seeing right now, major startups or blockchain products are either financial or mostly financial services. We still have some utility ICOs, but my advice would be, once you launch your ICO, you have to implement your AML program and look at the industry that you're launching your product with. If it's energy, there are still rules and regulations out there based on energy companies. Try to implement some of it. Exchanges, for example, you have major exchanges that have had to completely change the AML because now I'm speaking about the US government. They decided that all the exchanges will be considered as what we call MSBs, money business services. So just like Western Union, because you are remitting money, money is going back and forth between people in different areas of the world. So you look at, there is regulation about MSBs. Until the US or the regulators decide what they want to do with cryptocurrency, in the meantime, you can align or comply yourself with what is out there for the MSBs companies. So there is some rules, and there is some I'll call it a skeleton. You can start building on it, and until we get formal regulation. So if you have if your product is an energy product, there is some regulation for energy. Healthcare, we talked about healthcare this morning. You could look at what's already in place within the AML world on healthcare, on insurances, insurance companies, because you'll see there's a list, there are categories, those who are high risk, like restaurants, insurance companies, even MSBs like exchanges, because we know how money circulates among exchanges or among people throughout the world. And what we're trying to do is, again, protect people.
So you've been warned if you're going to do an ICO. Talk to her first.
One thing I just want to touch on, based on what Marie Noel was talking about, is that what I do see in technology companies, and I've seen this in the past, but I think it's more problematic with blockchain, is that I have these companies and they're like, okay, these entrepreneurs, and they're like, I want to put, for example, wills on the blockchain. And they don't even have a lawyer as part of their advisory group, right? So this is what I see, which I think is problematic, is a number of entrepreneurs who are kind of jumping into things, but not having proper advice around regulations, like you're talking about, and or legal, and you're going to run into issues. So maybe you get past the ICO stage. Maybe you're okay, maybe your ICO is compliant. You get down the road, but there are other issues that come up, like the KYC, or if you're insurance and you haven't properly, looked at insurance regulations. So I see that in the space, which I find troubling.
Right, and so that gets back to looking at the uses, I think, in part. If you're out there launching banking products, you may be subject to banking regulation. Right. If you're out there trying to reinvent how healthcare is managed, there may be privacy laws and policies that you have to deal with. If you're out there trying to make energy markets more efficient, and these are all great things, but there may be all kinds of energy regulations you have to deal with. And so it's looking at, again, what your business is, and just like starting a conventional business, if you're touching existing regulatory regimes, you have to appropriately address it. But let me ask, kind of one follow-up on the ICO part. Let's say that we reluctantly concede that a significant portion of the ICO market may involve issuing securities, at least initially. Mm-hmm. Do you think, does that kill the market? Does it still work, or is that it? Are we done?
Does it kill the market? Does it kill the liquidity market? Is that what you're referring to?
Well, there are people out there that say, if I have to treat my token as security, that I'm dead. I might as well not do it.
Well, it froze it. From the actual investor standpoint, the period of time when you look at pre-December 15th, December 17th of last year, you didn't have that conversation that Commissioner Clayton did at the Security Exchange Commission. So you had everyone doing the ICOs, the initial coin offerings, and they were getting money within a short period of time. We dealt with clients that were raising capital anywhere between 20 million to 100 million within less than 4 or 5 weeks. So what it did was it put a scared to the marketplace. Ironically, what happened was it actually defaulted back to the traditional regulations with the Security Exchange Commission and the Security Exchange Act. So the idea was to default back to a Reg D, right? To default back to maybe a Reg S. Reg A's you don't really see too much, but you find this default back to the old regulations. And what I hope that would have happened, you mentioned this very well with Canada, actually. I think Canada was a very good example of this, where you have this kind of sandbox combination, where in order for you to actually to regulate any kind of the society, you have to communicate. There is a central bank communication function that actually impacts how we actually build our lives. So in the case of Canada, what they did was they created this whole sandbox approach where they said, okay, we're going to call this a security token, but these are the tools and steps that you have to take in place to meet these qualities. And I think that we didn't do that in the U.S. We had the Security Exchange Commission going on one end. We had the Commodity Future Trading Commission on the other end. We had the Fed and the OCC, who are actually good at policy making, right? You're true policy makers. And I'm not trying to be biased because I'm a Fed person myself, and I've written policy myself. They're good policymakers. They understand how to sit there and look at the impacts across the entire society, because that's the job of the Fed, is look at systemic risk. So to answer your question, does it actually, it may freeze the marketplace to a certain degree, but I think that what you're finding now is that people are looking at other sources to raise capital.
But so, I think that is potentially another misconception, that if you have to treat it as a security token, you're dead in the water, you're not. And so I want to just take 2 seconds. You mentioned Reg D and Reg S, and perhaps put in context what that really means, because a lot of people have just assumed, I've got to avoid the U.S. altogether. Right. It's not true. If you are issuing a token as a security token, it, by the way, doesn't mean that your token is a security or an equity in the traditional sense. It doesn't mean that you're giving somebody an ownership interest in your company. It doesn't mean you're guaranteeing them profits or a dividend or any other rights. It just means that you are going to distribute your token in a manner that is consistent with the exemptions from security laws regulations. So what that means in practical real terms, for example, in the U.S., is that on the U.S. side, tokens are issued in accordance with a Reg D safe harbor. That means for the first year, the buyers of that token have to be so-called accredited investors. They have to meet a minimum income test, and with very limited exceptions, it means for the first year, those U.S. buyers have to hold their tokens. They can't resell them. But after that first year, 1 year only, for the most part, those tokens are free to be sold to anybody under any circumstance. So it's not as if you've got a lifelong overhang on those tokens. It's 1 year. And on the non-U.S. side, the safe harbor exemption is called Reg S. And what Reg S means is that after a relatively short lockup period, anybody can buy those tokens, with one exception, at least for the first year. If they're going to be sold, they have to be resold to somebody else who's another non-U.S. person. So that's not really, to me, a huge negative impact on liquidity. I know that it's taken a while for the market to start to think about it, but I think that there is a lot of room to sell tokens under these exemptions from security laws in the U.S., in Canada, and elsewhere without killing the market.
So another thing that's interesting in Canada is that there's a few companies that have set up to do an ICO in a regulated way. So they've worked collaboratively with the regulator to set it up. One of them is called Token Funder. And so if you wanted to do an ICO in Canada, you're a startup company, you could go to Token Funder, and then it will be a regulated ICO.
Well, in Japan, you also have the registration with the Japan Financial Service Authority. So let's say if you are doing an exchange, you have to register JFAS, JFSA, in order for you. And it's a good vehicle, because what it did was it created an environment where the government is actually getting that information for future exchanges. So Japan, I believe they have 16 in total that's been registered. I think there's 16 outstanding that's going to be registered. But it created that dialogue that needed to happen. And you mentioned that. That's so important. And from a regulatory standpoint, where you have that opportunity to actually sit there and partner with a technology that the regulators don't understand. The regulators don't understand what's actually happening. I've been on the other side of the table. I can tell you, when we had new products and new technology, we did not understand what was going on. But what we did was we targeted right firms and right industries to sit them down and actually have a one-on-one conversation. And that helped us to shape the policies. So the policies were beneficial for the industry, but also it mitigated the risk that actually helped the consumers.
And I again, I agree with you. There's a big learning curve, but I think it is getting better. Now, if you look from the U.S. perspective, I don't think our regulators are as progressive as some of the things we've heard coming out of the Bahamas here. I wish we were as far along in thinking as you are, but we're making progress. Last week, for example, the SEC, the director of the Division of Corporate Finance at the SEC made a very interesting statement where, in effect, he said, Ether is not a security. Now, why is that a big deal? Because there was all this rumor that the SEC was going to come out and say, even though they have decided to not treat Bitcoin as a security. They were going to treat Ether the opposite.
Mhm.
And what was interesting about it, and this starts to get into the distinction between potentially security tokens and utility tokens, was that the SEC hinted that had they answered that question at the time that Ethereum was first created and Ether was first sold, they probably would have said it's a security. Because again, they were selling it to raise money to build out the Ethereum platform. But now, one of the things they said, well, this is sufficiently distributed network. There is as much ongoing activity coming from the entire community as opposed to the Ethereum Foundation, so that investors that buy Ether, even though they are hoping to profit, aren't relying solely on a management or development team. It's actually the entire community that's helping move it forward. So they were able to say Ether is not a security. Now, that means that, interestingly, at least from a US perspective and potentially other countries as well, the characterization of a token could change over time. On the day you issue it, it might be deemed to be a security and regulated, but over time it could be shift and potentially morph into something else, such as utility tokens, so that it is no longer regulated. Now, I think it's important, while that may be true with respect to security laws, again, it doesn't change things, for example, from the AML KYC perspective. And so among other things, exchanges that are involved in trading crypto have ongoing AML KYC responsibilities, even if issuers try to argue that they don't. And I don't think that's going to change no matter how we characterize tokens.
That doesn't change for the AML perspective, AML in general, just not for the KYC, but the entire life cycle for AML. So the startups or blockchain companies would still have to go through the checklist of the AML program, make sure that they check all the boxes in order to get off the hook. And again, make sure when you create your company that you have a very strong team, because I've seen teams, I've seen projects. You have very strong engineer teams. Everybody is really highly technical in the teams most of the time. But I'm looking for people who have teams with lawyers. You need lawyers who understand these things and who can follow up with the changes, the regulations, and the new laws, regulations that come into play. And then you need a very strong AML team, especially that most of these projects are banking or financial based. And do not forget taxation, very important. I haven't heard any conversations around taxation. You're not off the hook for that either, because you still need to pay your taxes. And for those who have MSBs, I've seen some reports coming out of Coinbase and other major exchanges where you have to be able to integrate taxation forms for your customers or those who come through your exchanges to either invest or buy or sell, whatever they do. You need to track that down, and you need to be able to issue some reports so that they can file for taxes at the end of the year. So it's very important that you cover all these aspects when you look into, because we get so excited about, I have an idea. Okay, I have a problem. I know how to resolve this problem. And then we start working on building the platform, and then boom, we're launching an ICO. And then we have all these cracks that are still out there where you have spent all this money and you could be shut down anytime.
So as much as I didn't want us to be the panel known as the one that brought up the dreaded tax word, you are right. You are right that anytime people are buying and selling assets, there are taxes involved, and at the end of the day, a cryptocurrency is an asset. Mm-hmm. No matter what it does and what its features are, it's an asset that has value, and there may be taxes involved. That's all I'm going to say about taxes, though.
Can I ask something here, Joe? Because I think Marie Noel hit it right on nose when it talk about KYC. The rules and regulations for KYC has been around for a long time under the Bank Secrecy Act. Countries do have memorandums of understanding They do actually exchange information. The U.S. exchanges information with Canada. Canada exchanges, U.S. exchanges information with Japan. So at a very policy level, at a central bank level, they do have written agreements to exchange information among jurisdictions. So it's not as if BSA, KYC, know your customer, is different in one jurisdiction compared to the other jurisdiction. It's actually how do you actually implement it. And one of the things that you have to do is the CYP, right? That's the Customer Identification Program. Part of that Customer Identification Program is customer due diligence. Mm-hmm. Then the other part is enhanced due diligence. So that's the idea of actually going in and saying, okay, we have risk rank this particular individual, we risk rank this particular transaction. Now we're going to do more due diligence to ensure that we actually have the proper documentation, that we actually done the proper verification, and so forth. So this steps that's been around for a period of time. So regulators actually have the tools in place. The big question is how do you actually gear that towards, and Joe brings up a good point, with how do we get that towards cryptocurrency? How do we reapply that to cryptocurrency when we're trying to redefine what is a cryptocurrency? And I think when regulators, they're sitting back and they are asking this question. Don't think they're not talking to themselves. They're probably going to sit at the Basel III or Basel IV committee, and they're going to probably have maybe discussions as to how they have to approach cryptocurrency across the risk spectrum.
Well, one of the interesting things about that is that blockchain itself is trying to offer some technological solutions to all this, and so I think there's going to be a lot more to come on it. Before we open it up to questions, there's one other thing I would like to address. The panel right before us, the exciting panel as opposed to the regulatory panel, it was pretty cool listening to what people here are trying to do. Mm-hmm. So you're here, you're trying to build a business, you want to go out and potentially do an ICO. Now you're looking at the entire world, because as much as it would be great to raise all your money locally in the Bahamas, realistically you're going to bring in investors and customers in other countries as well. So how do you possibly go about doing this, understanding that we've got this entire globe where the regulations are inconsistent, they're ambiguous, they potentially have draconian enforcement outcomes if you violate them. So what do you do? How do you approach this and go about building and launching your business?
Can I jump in here?
Yeah.
I think from a policy standpoint, and I'm thinking of a regulatory standpoint, I think the opportunity, and someone mentioned this in the prior panel, I think she really hit on a nail, partially so. There has to be a regional collaboration among different countries, and you develop a framework in the region. I think a regional framework works best. When you start to isolate yourself, what happens is you have this competitiveness. So what works here in Bahamas may not work somewhere else. But if you have a regional framework that's being done where it's actually inclusive, and when I say inclusive, including the businesses. So they were absolutely correct. That last panel made a lot of sense when they said that we need to work together with the government. Right? But yet the government has to sit together and create policies for that region. So I think once you start to do that, then it's a lot more easier to have the business licenses and everything else for registration.
Well, what do people think? Show of hands. Is the regional approach something that, for example, could happen among Caribbean nations?
I think one of the challenges with regional approach, or kind of having something that's more global in nature, is that it will take a long time to get consensus and get people to agree. And in the near term, short term, you have to have something. You have to start thinking, you have to have something in place. Kind of what we've done in Canada, we've put out guidelines. So there's discussion, there's, with entrepreneurs, there's thinking about it. But you have to protect at some level to the consumer. We've talked about enterprise risk, but there's also the interest of the consumer, and so you want to protect the consumers. What I see is sometimes people investing in Bitcoin or Ethereum or other cryptocurrencies not really understanding, thinking that, this is going to appreciate, I want to get in on this at this really low level, and then 10 years down the road it's going to appreciate. But what we heard yesterday was that actually only 8% of these companies, after a year of raising money through the ICOs, are around. So there's a real risk here, and so as regulators, you want to protect right now the consumers.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, what I would suggest as an approach is that there's no way if you're here, for example, and you want to do an ICO, you're going to be able to know what every country's regulations are with respect to it. It's not possible, and even if you could figure that out, to try to comply with every country's regulations would put you out of business. But I think at the same time, if you adopt an approach of being rational and engage in sound business practices, in other words, just because we're in the blockchain space, and just because we're doing an ICO doesn't mean that the old rules can be ignored. You have to engage in appropriate sound business practices, and I think if you do, it doesn't mean you're going to stay out of hot water in every country around the world, but you've got a much better shot of not getting yourself into trouble if you just take that pragmatic approach. I think with that, why don't we open it up to some questions if there are any. Please.
Great. Again, amazing. From your experience in launching myself and launching, but more so providing a service, amazing blockchain and crypto service, what do you feel is in part of the region of the world has the highest or gold standard presently to evaluate a currency or a blockchain technology?
Japan.
Well, I think the way that I would answer it, I think the way I would answer it is, again, to go back to what I said before, that the concept of forum shopping, picking a certain jurisdiction to be the place where you issue your ICO from, doesn't solve all the problems. Now, that said, I think there's some jurisdictions that have tried to take a holistic approach in how they think about crypto and ICOs and tokens, and a good example, especially for people in this room to think about it, is Gibraltar. Gibraltar's taken an interesting approach where they have looked at all of their regulations, their financial regulations, their security regulations, their consumer regulations, and have tried to update all of them in a way that embraces crypto. They have also said that if you're going to get involved, you're going to have to be regulated in one way or the other. So whether it's a security or something else, if it's not a security, there's still going to be consumer protection rules that apply. Gibraltar's gone pretty far to try to create within their jurisdiction regulated exchanges to create platforms to trade crypto, regardless of what the crypto is, but to do it in a way that is consistent with how other regulated exchanges around the world do. So they're creating this infrastructure or environment that hopefully, from their view, is that if you happen to be in Gibraltar and issuing your ICO from there, it would potentially give other jurisdictions some comfort to know that before you've gone out into the market, you've had to go through a number of hoops within Gibraltar itself. Yeah. Again, it doesn't solve the regulatory issue from other jurisdictions, but on the margin it could help. And that's the type of thing, by the way, that the Bahamas could very easily do as well.
So yes, I agree with you, because what we've learned is that you could be compliant here in the Bahamas, but if you offer your products in the United States, you're probably not going to be compliant there. It doesn't even matter whether it's security or utility. So there are jurisdictions that are more lenient than others, but you still have to go through all these hoops to make sure that you are compliant, and you look into what other countries where you want to offer your product, where your investors are. You want to make sure that you're compliant there as well. Otherwise, there's no point of even trying to go to other jurisdictions. And from the AML perspective, as I said earlier, the G20 summit, I forgot which one, the G20 countries have agreed that whatever FAFT puts out at the end of this month, all of them would go for it, because at this point, I think they're tired of trying to figure out on their own, so they have put everything in the hands of this governance body. It's a global governance body, and they will adopt and go with it. So hopefully that'll be better for everybody.
I have to commend you guys for demonstrating such expertise, and I hope everybody was paying attention, because it took me about a month of back and forth and about $10,000 to get that information from my lawyers.
We're happy to send you a bill afterwards if you want.
Yeah, I wish I had come here first. So I just wanted to comment real quick, though, some of the extra things. With the SEC meeting, the town hall meeting in Georgia last week, they did come out. I asked a question about registering our ICO with an exchange, and we are completely securities compliant. They pretty much just said point blank, it doesn't matter if you pass the Howey test anymore. That's never been an issue. If you raise money or you intend to ever be on a secondary market, even if you say it's not a security, don't buy it for that reason. You're a security if you're raising money. And then they went so far as to say there are no currently registered security broker dealers dealing security tokens anywhere in the world that are officially registered. So technically, none of the tokens are trading legally that are utility tokens. But she said as long as you are a security token and you abide by the rules, as soon as any of them, which some of them are in process, as soon as they get that security broker license, then they could trade our token and others that are security tokens.
There are various platforms that are in various stages of either launching or having launched, particularly what are called ATS platforms, which are parts of broker-dealers, where people are modifying their ATS business activities in order to include crypto. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that.
Right,
over
just
the course
like
of the year.
T0.
Yeah.
T0 is doing that.
T0 is like
And we know the Overstock.com people, so we'll probably be listed there soon.
I can talk to you about that. I did that
Yeah.
deal.
In Canada, there's Token Funder, so.
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Teltner, a question for you.
That's him.
I know, that's you. Okay, why do you have to wait for a year before you can sell your token?
Well, if you are selling your token under what's called Reg D in the U.S., that's one of the exemptions from the security laws registration requirements. And the trade-off for not having to register that instrument as security is that it's deemed to be sold on a private placement basis, and that means it's restricted, and the restriction rules say that you've got to hold it for a year before you can sell it. There's some limited exceptions to that, but generally it's a one-year lockup. So it's part of the regulatory regime.
Yeah.
Why?
Just
Because in contrast to a registered security offering, where the issuer is subject to ongoing reporting and oversight by the SEC, to do a private placement, you have no reporting obligations with the SEC, you have no specific audit obligations with the SEC, and so the trade-off for not having that SEC oversight and responsibility is that the SEC expects that the investors who buy those instruments are going to be a higher level of sophistication, a accredited investor standard, and to make sure that there's no inappropriate activity in those tokens. One of the ways they assure that those tokens don't make their way out into the hands of ineligible or inappropriate investors is to say that you've got to hold them for a year before you can trade them.
Yes. So just a question here on this side around, I guess, so first let me start. So I'm a Bahamian, but I live in London, and I'm a former Wall Street banker, and I've been in crypto since 2013. Yes. So sorry. So I'm a Bahamian. I live in London. I'm a former Wall Street banker, and I've been in crypto since 2013.
So you're very confused.
Very confused. And you know, I'm in sort of two minds here because I flew to the Bahamas. I'm very excited about the blockchain, the development, its initiatives. But then I think we spent an hour here talking about regulation and all these things that's impacting the developed world, right? And I think we're very clear what's happening in the developed world is now the tariffs are coming up. And as developing countries, you have to keep your guard up because you don't know whether or not maybe the U.S. might renege on their deals or not. And so I think we need to be cautious as to whether or not, as we seek to do business, as we seek to solve very simple problems. I left it 20 years ago, and we still can send money quickly to Nicaragua. Today, we still can't. So the people here are looking to blockchain in terms of how do we send value across the world. Today, we have 2 billion unbanked people, mainly in Southeast Asia, mainly in the Caribbean. And so we have this blockchain technology, and the first use case is cryptocurrency, right? But it's only one use case, right? And I think what tends to happen is it sort of dominates the conversations all over the world. I've traveled all over the world to many of these conferences, and it kind of steals the thunder away. And so my question to you as great panelists and very seasoned and very credentialed is, for the Bahamas, right? What is your message to our government? There are many officials here today in terms of how do we embrace this technology, also, adhere to consumer protection, stay ahead of this market, not get left behind, but also not to over-regulate, because we see what's also happening in the developed world, because it hasn't worked that great in many circumstances. And I think what you've seen in England with regard to Brexit, a lot of that is because of economic pressure. People feel like they haven't had their fair share. And so I think, there's a real confused message. And I'm here for a breath of fresh air because I want to see, where I'm from, the developed world, where we can do this, but maybe not so reliant on the U.S. and developed markets anymore, because they haven't been the best when they were doing deals in the past. And I think a lot of people here know what I'm talking about. So, thank you.
Yeah. Can I jump into on this? Because I think the last panel talked about Bohemian, just really reinvesting in Bohemian. I think that's the start right there. I think your government is actually working with different companies, with the different projects here, and giving them the actual communication and relationships. That's the first step. Part of consumer protection is also consumer education. The one thing I've noticed in the past 2 days here is that people had a lot of questions about blockchain technology. They had questions about cryptocurrency. I like to use crypto assets because they're not really currencies yet, unless the central bank here defines it as a currency. But the education itself is very critical because it helps with consumer protection. So I think that you're on the right track, but it starts with the government working with the stakeholders here and educating the actual community, but also at the same time setting the right, and you mentioned this before, setting the right policies and procedures, the immediate policies, procedures, but on the long term, they have to look at it from the standpoint of other geopolitical areas. It's just fundamental when you look at cryptocurrencies because it's a money flow, right? It's money that's being flowed not just in the Bahamas itself, but in multiple jurisdictions. So you have to be able to set the framework in place. The framework includes government, it includes consumers, it includes businesses, but it also intertwine that together is that education that has to happen. So once you have that in place, then I think that Bahamas is going to be in a very better position than most places.
Sure. And don't forget, this panel was focusing on crypto and ICOs. We heard from the prior panel, and actually for the last 2 days, all the really amazing things you can do with blockchain technology. And to me, I think in part, while the Bitcoin and crypto and ICOs are a lot of what the media focuses on because that is a lot of the hype and sexy, the mundane stuff are all the great ways you can take blockchain technology and improve the ability to manage title, to definitively say, this is my property, this is my home, I own it. To be able to create the ability to generate and manage electricity on a small neighborhood scale that we saw in previous presentation. To be able to much better manage your health because healthcare records are actually accessible and shareable among different physicians. So all of these great things that you can do with blockchain technology don't have anything to do with the crypto or ICO space. And it's important at a local level, I think, to work between the government and private sector to push all of those really cool uses forward.
Can I jump in here? It's a smart city. So think of big data, right? Get back to big data. The blockchain is about data management. At the end of the day, it's about data flow. So you have what they call smart cities, which are being done around the world. Right? And smart cities is a centralized government process and how data is being used to serve the people. So get back to the fundamentals of how government is going to actually receive data, use data, and also at the same time how that's going to apply and impact individuals here in the Bahamas. Once you get to that point, that's when you build up on blockchain technology, how can you have different projects and everything else. But it's actually, it's the use of data. At the end of the day, it's the use of data, how data is being used, and how it's being applied for products and services and everything else.
Yeah, and to add to that is just that you still need controls in place. We can't just run rogue because you need controls in place. What do you do with drug trafficking? What do you do with human trafficking? What do you do with financing of terrorism? So we have to keep all that into perspective. All these projects are great projects, but how do we protect people?
There are actually blockchain applications that are trying to solve those problems too.
Exactly. So, yes. So let's not just look at regulation as being something very restrictive. We can all work together and make this profitable and constructive for everybody. I've seen there are some people, focus groups working in the United States with the government to come together, because as we talked yesterday, I said, what do you do with, I've seen projects on real estate, for example, and they're creating smart contracts. What is how do you make that smart contract legal for a judge to even be able to read that thing, that whole hash something that you see on the screen? A judge has to have some technical background to be able to understand that in order to litigate, in case of a conflict. What do you do with that? So these are all the things that we have to think about. How does a judge looks at this? How can he even make a decision based on a peer-to-peer contract through a smart contract? So
we have time for one more question.
Okay, it's kind of a question and comment. In all of this, the way I understand it, whether you're using blockchain technology or cryptocurrency, whatever it is, at the end of the day, it's all to make money. I mean, no matter how good your intentions are, whether it's healthcare or whatever it is, if you're trying to streamline something, at the end of the day, it's either to save money going out or to bring money in. So I guess in part of the regulations for crypto, does anybody know if the plan for crypto long term is to replace the fiat that we're using now? Because essentially, when I buy Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever it is, I'm not trying to amass this Bitcoin to no end. It's because I'm amassing that to switch that into euro or dollars, whatever it is, so that I can actually do something with it.
Right.
So is the idea for crypto is that's going to replace, because crypto actually makes the transfer of dollars or euro, whatever, a lot easier and instantaneous. So is this the move or the thinking that it'll replace that?
I don't think that's a very specific to local, that's a local question, for Bahamans, to decide, whether that's going to be the case. In Japan, they're working on a digital currency. So they're looking at blockchain, and they're saying, yeah, we can have a digital currency. They're trying to do that for the Olympics, right?
Olympics, exactly.
There's certainly people out there that think it will eventually replace traditional currency. Michael Casey, I think, would fall in that camp, that he thinks on a long-term basis that's exactly where we're going. There are others that, especially in financial services and the banking world, probably think that that's never going to happen, or at least hope it's never going to happen.
And then it's also a mindset. How do you convince your grandmother not to use her Bahamian dollars to start using her cryptocurrency? So that's going to take time for people to even come up with the. I mean, I don't know how that's going to happen. A lot of people have different ideas. I walked the streets yesterday and somebody stopped me, and she had a small shop there. She said, "Oh, hey, talk to me about about Bitcoin." And I was shocked, because this is a lady who has a small store right there at the marketplace. Who knows about Bitcoin? And I was shocked. I said, "Oh, okay. What would you like to know about Bitcoin?" So I spent half an hour talking to her. I promised her that I'll go back today, because she's been trying to invest in Bitcoin. However, I do not know what exchange she can use here in the Bahamas, because somebody else said yesterday that they couldn't get through Coinbase. So I said, okay, I'll come back. I'm going to figure out what to use here in the Bahamas. So this is, the education, they know that we are here today because I asked her how she knows about Bitcoin, why she thought I could help her with that. And she said, we know what you guys are doing down there.
So on that note, I think the good news is that our panel is done and the bars are officially open. The bad news is I think that the bars here are only going to take Bitcoin tonight. So.
Oh, wow. That's funny. That's funny.
Fantastic. Are we on? Can you hear me? Okay. So we have come to another end of a fantastic day of conference. We've learned that regulations and legalities are a major part of the process. And we thank you, the stellar panel, for enlightening us in respect to crucial details in the area of blockchain. Remember, everyone, a good legal partner is key to the success of your blockchain company. Before we have closing remarks, I would like to invite to the podium and to our stage area the chairman of the BBCC, Dr. Donovan Moxey, for a special announcement.
Thanks to the panel. Thanks to everyone for coming and staying. And it's been very, very enlightening, even for myself. So thank you guys very, very much for sharing your international perspectives. One of the things I'd like to do is make an announcement. Due to some circumstances beyond our control, it's unfortunate that our keynote for tomorrow, Anthony DiOrio, will not make it. However, what we've done is I spoke with the minister, and all of the things you're just seeing in terms of blockchain, inviting companies to come here to the Bahamas, is all based on the Commercial Enterprises Act. And so tomorrow, we have one of the lawyers from the from the Attorney General's office, and we're going to do a deep dive in the Commercial Enterprise Act, what it means for international investors, international entrepreneurs, Bahamians, and what the intent of that act was in terms of growing the technology sector here in the Bahamas. So we'll do a deep dive with that. Additionally, we have our Data Protection Commissioner, Mr. Michael Wright. We all know the Europeans passed the new regulations on privacy, use of data. All of that now is also important in terms of what that means for companies that come to the Bahamas, because we are actually looking at what those regulations are and actually formulating our own in terms of how we handle data protection from a legal standpoint. So we start off tomorrow morning with pitches again. Everybody enjoyed the pitches today. I learned a lot with these entrepreneurs that came here. We have another 6 pitchers as well tomorrow, as well as our panelists. And so we look forward to seeing all of you here early at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. So with that, I'll turn it over.
And so having said that, thank you, Dr. Moxey, I present another opportunity for all of us to give back, and that is supporting our local restaurants, again, locally here on property at the hotel, and again across the street at the Port Lucaya area. Don't forget, once you mention that you are part of the BBCC, you are entitled to a 10% discount. So enjoy the evening. Pardon me? And there are several. They're all aware, and so if you just mention or show your ID, you will be entitled to a 10% discount. And so having said that, we thank everybody for their attentiveness, for their time. We look forward to seeing you at 9 a.m. sharp tomorrow morning. Thank you.
Good job.
At its inception, Alive promised to provide all major islands of the Bahamas with superior products and services, and we continue to do that daily. With more than approximately 103,000 subscribers, Alive has changed the telecommunications industry. We consistently stress that Alive is more than just a phone company, but rather a diverse, ever-evolving entity dedicated to fostering meaningful experiences and pioneering groundbreaking technology. At Alive, we believe in promoting the advancement of technology in as many ways possible. Technology impacts every domain of our society: education, sport, community engagement, arts and culture, healthcare, and of course, financial services. Back in November of last year, Alive launched its Smart Innovation Strategy right here in Grand Bahama. Since that time, we have worked diligently to provide innovations in healthcare, civic engagement, and education as part of that agenda. We have also introduced innovations in our business services by launching one, the most comprehensive and technologically advanced loyalty rewards program in the market, The List, an app-based rewards tool available to both our corporate partners and our subscribers that provides a unique and efficient way to bring both companies together with prospective consumers. 2, an innovative cloud-based push-to-talk tool that can be used across Alive's network anywhere in or out of the country once LTE service is available. We also continue to perfect our ever-evolving and flexible product suite that is designed to give the consumer maximum options at the best value. We are particularly proud of our new postpaid plans and roaming products. Finally, we look forward to completing at the end of this month and upon the 2nd anniversary of our license award, the complete rollout of our network throughout the entire Bahamas. We have achieved much, but we are not resting on our laurels. Last year, we joined the Bahamas Financial Services Board as the exclusive telecommunications partner of their FinTech Working Group. Through our participation in this body, we hope to continue to work with the foremost minds in financial services and law to help the country to prepare for the blockchain and cryptocurrency revolution. This is a unique partnership that is entirely in keeping with the way we do business, to be at the forefront of all new innovations in the marketplace and to bring these innovations to the Bahamian consumer. We are happy to be back in Freeport to deepen our participation in this arena and to be a part of the first Bahamas Blockchain and Cryptocurrency Conference. We look forward to an exciting few days with you all. Thank you.
I believed in all the rest. Now my eyes are open. I finally see, and I believe in best.
At its inception, Alive promised to provide all major islands of the Bahamas with superior products and services, and we continue to do that daily. With more than approximately 103,000 subscribers, Alive has changed the telecommunications industry. We consistently stress that Alive is more than just